Welcome back to the 10 Adventures podcast. We were talking recently with Mico, who's joined us again on the podcast, and we were talking about the best places to go backpacking in the Canadian Rockies. And we realized we didn't have enough time to talk about kind of how to get into backpacking or long distance trekking. And Mico thought it'd be good to come back for another chat around what I've learned in 25 or 30 years of trekking and backpacking. So Mico, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks again for having me, Richard. I think it's so funny when we talk about this topic because we spent a whole podcast talking about the trails that you go to. But I know a lot of the game of backpacking has nothing to do with the trail. It's everything to do with what's on your back and what's in your mind and your fitness level. So this is a huge aspect that I think just as important as picking the trail. So I'm glad we can come back and chat about this again.
Yeah, I'm excited. I've never kind of thought of what I've learned in my career of the outdoors, but also 200 plus episodes of the 10 Adventures podcast. I've taken tips and bought gear and tried stuff out after other guests shared it with me. So I've kind of been like a testing lab for all these different ideas that have come through the podcast in the last few years.
Yeah. I think everybody goes through their own journey of what works for them and what doesn't work for them. And I'm excited again to once again flip the seats around and be asking you a lot of these questions. I think that would be very helpful for anybody who's learning about getting into backpacking or who wants to improve their gear or wants to plan a great trip this year. So I'm going to just fire away if you're ready with some of our first questions. And it's going to be about your gear and your packing, which is probably a whole podcast in itself, but we're going to try to keep it kind of condensed. I want to start off with asking you a little bit about some of your, your must-have items for multi-day backpacking trip. And maybe even before we get that, maybe can you share a little bit of your philosophy when you are planning your pack for backpacking?
Yeah, so I think back to my first big trip. I spent the summer, 20 plus years ago in the Alps and the Pyrenees doing these long distance backpacking trails where I had everything on my back. And I had an 85-liter backpack. It was overflowing. And kind of my philosophy then was make sure I have everything I might need. So I was wearing hiking boots. I had a spare set of running shoes. I had a spare set of Birkenstocks. I had like 5 shirts, and I had 2 books I was reading. I had a thick, like France Lonely Planet, as well as a smaller, and I was just killing myself. And from that day, every single trip I take a little bit less. Here with kids, I've really taken less because I'm carrying all their stuff. So actually, our first big backpacking trip in 2019, our youngest was 5, I think. And I resurrected my old 85-liter pack, which is enormous, and that was overflowing again. And as my kids have gotten older, they've carried more. But really, everything with backpacking for me has been, what can I do without? And so our packs are down to my wife and I have 45-liter packs. Our kids probably have 25 to 40-liter packs. And it's just being real harsh in terms of what do I need to survive. And like, that's from things like the tents and the mat we use, and our bags are light, our sleeping bags, but also like what clothes we take, how we can do double and triple duty with things. And then also all the different supplies we have, which every trip we kind of come back, we say, we didn't even use this. We didn't even, why did we have this? And so like the must-haves for me is I've got to have an emergency kit. I've got 3 little boys with me and my wife. And if something happens, I want to make sure I can take care of them. That includes a satellite, transceiver thing. I have a Garmin InReach that allows me to call help if I need it. It includes a way to make fire. So I have a little set of like fireproof matches that I use. And then really it's like the minimum gear we need to survive, and really focused on if it's cold or wet, can we take care of ourselves? Because if the weather's nice, it doesn't really matter. But in the Canadian Rockies, it's how do we deal with kind of adverse conditions? And so those are, that's kind of how I look at it when I go with my family. What's interesting when I go on just my own, or with like, if just my wife and I do it, we get rid of like some luxuries. Like we don't take a cooker. We just cold soak stuff because that gets rid of probably a kilo of weight. We can simplify like the amount of stuff we need because it's not worried about, okay, well, with the kids, we might have a bit more of a emergency medical kit because, as adults, we're a bit stronger, but, yeah, like everything is just take less. And every year I'm surprised I find ways to take a little bit less. And it's fun now. It's fun. Like my bag is really light unless it's a long backpack where I have a lot of food. My bag is really light. Like oftentimes, actually, we did the rock wall, which is a trail I mentioned in our last podcast. It's 5 days. Day 3, you can kind of only get to day 3 by a full, like by doing, the 3 days to get there, or by doing a full day hike up from a parking lot, which is about 6 hours. And we come into camp and another couple says, "Are you guys just day hiking this?" Because all of our packs were so small. And it's like, yeah, it looks like the 5 of us are carrying day packs. And actually, I was just so happy to get that comment because, like, okay, I'm actually doing this right now when other backpackers are just kind of marveling at how little the 5 of us have.
Yeah, I love that. I just got to say first and foremost that I think everybody has a huge journey ahead of themselves when they first get into backpacking. And it often starts off very much the same. They start off with a very large capacity backpack. There's a lot of just in case items inside of it. And then that first backpacking trip, it's just grueling. It's amazing. But on the back and on the legs, let's just say there's a lot of lessons to be learned. And me personally, that was kind of my experience. My first backpacking trip was really in the Rockies. And I remember it was just a 2-nighter that ended up becoming just a 1-nighter because we couldn't keep going with all the snow ahead of us. But I remember my backpack was filled with, we might need extra this or extra that. And I think I bought a whole stick of deodorant, which I think that might be kind of gross to some people, but I realized after a while, after a lot of backpacking, I'm like, well, everybody just kind of smells. You don't need deodorant out in the woods. So I remember that the backpack started off pretty big on the first go around. And then as you say, the more you get into it, the more you're able to dial down your pack and really identify what works best. And for me, a lot of it was just having a good look at everything in your backpack. So I took this philosophy from a good neighbor of mine who was very into the outdoors in the Rocky Mountains, and he had what they call packing parties, which is when you get together with all your friends that you're going to be going backpacking with, maybe a couple nights before or the night before, and then you bring all your backpack, everything that you're going to pack except maybe the food, and you all get together and you put it out right in front of you. And then everybody gets to basically scrutinize everybody's pack and everybody gets to pack together. And then you all kind of realize that, like, yeah, we have, maybe we have 3 cook sets between the 4 of us or the 5 of us. Do we really need all that? And then you're able to kind of whittle it down and everybody can kind of give you tips. And that's where I got a lot of my favorite tips from these times when I'm packing side by side with friends, because then they're able to kind of give you a bit more ideas of how to pack your weight or pack your backpack and all things that you don't need, things you do need. And you're also able to pass those ideas along as well. So I really love hearing that story of the big backpack, because I too, I think I remember picking up the 75 liter and thinking, yeah, this might be enough for 2 days. And then nowadays, yeah, I carry, I think, just about a 40 liter or 35. And then that is more than enough to get me by, because I realize that when you can enjoy the walking experience more, just, being light on your own 2 feet and feeling like you feeling like you packed minimally, I feel like there's a certain kind of joy that you can get from that. So I'm glad you're sharing those tips. And like I said, this is the same journey that everybody goes through. I don't think anybody starts off backpacking and coming out of the first trip and saying, yeah, that was just the right amount of weight. Don't think I've ever heard anyone say that. So I guess my next question for you, maybe to help us, move steps forward in this for anybody who was listening, getting to the first time. What do you think maybe is the biggest mistakes that you think that people have made when they're backpacking for either their first trip or their 100th trip?
The biggest single mistake I've seen is, during the pandemic and just before, a group of kind of friends we'd go out on a big backpack every year or two. And one year we're down in Glacier doing the North Circle Trail, which is like one of the best backpacks in the world. I should have mentioned that in our last podcast, but it's in Montana in Glacier National Park. And we get to the first camp and there's grizzlies everywhere. And he starts bringing us food, and he's got tins of tuna fish, which first off, tins of tuna fish are heavy. Second of all, once you open them, you can't really clean them. So he's trying to clean out like the tin in the water. And I'm just thinking, we've got all this fish smell all around camp. And I think he had 6 tins of tuna fish he brought. I saw actually on that same trip, we met a bunch of guys who like they were kind of old school. They had guitars. They were opening up tins of beans and tins of chili. And I was amazed, like to bring tinned wet food into the backcountry. That was kind of like, it kind of blew my mind. But I think outside of those, the biggest mistake is just this idea of how much stuff do you need. So like for me, if the weather looks really, really terrible, we just don't go. Like I'm not a hardcore. I realize it's not going to be pleasant bringing all the gear you need. If it's going to be around 0 and snowing, all the gear you need to go backpacking, we just don't do it. But in terms of our packing, it's, we have a raincoat, we've got a toque, we've got a fleece layer, we've got a merino wool long sleeve, a merino wool short sleeve, 2 or 3 pairs of underwear, a pair of hiking trousers with my kids, they can zip off, 2 pairs of socks and footwear. And that's kind of all we take. My kids might take a puffy. We have these kind of light puffies instead of a fleece layer, but that's kind of all we take for our entire trip. And I see people who, like, I've seen people that are changing their insulating layer at camp. They'll have an orange Arc'teryx, and in the morning they'll have a slightly thicker, blue Patagonia. And I just think, oh wow, that's just a lot of stuff. So yeah, so I think it's just trying to rationalize what you need. Again, taking a cooker, I actually don't mind having cold food. Like I realized for me, my wife actually hates it. So sometimes, even though I want to go without it, I'll bring it because she likes hot food. But, having, cold ramen, that's fine. Having cold coffee, that's fine. Because for me, it's not really about the food. And that actually leads to one other aspect is it's just so easy to make your own meals, and they're so much healthier. And so if you think of all the stuff you have to carry around with these prepackaged meals, even if you get ultra light, you can do a lot of that yourself by dehydrating vegetables, bringing a bit of like spicy oil, bringing a bit of peanut butter, and just making something that's going to be delicious and light into the mountains with you.
Yeah. I think that's really good. Taking a good look at your food is can be a huge source of weight, and I think a lot of people always think about your dry weight, which is everything in your backpack except for your food and water. But it's not to. We shouldn't also underestimate what the weight of the food can be. For example, the canned tuna. If anybody is interested in having canned tuna, but they don't want the cans, you can always get the plastic pouches of tuna. That's what I normally do, and it's a lot easier to clean, and then also put inside of a Ziploc bag, and then you don't get you don't get the big signal for all the bears in the area to come check you guys out. But yeah, no, those are really good tips. I also want to say a good philosophy that someone always gave me when we're talking about packing is always be ready, always be hiking your own hike. So I know we're talking about these tips and for beginners and mistakes and things you can do to avoid, but I think at the end of the day, if you're happy with the way you pack, you shouldn't really be comparing yourself to other people. It's great to take their ideas and to develop your own packing system. But I always feel like I'm doing my own thing. You do your own thing, and I'm going to respect you for doing that. And because I know my backpack, some of the things probably be the things that you would read about in a book, and other things that just don't make any sense to everybody else. But I personally this is the way I like to make things. Like, for example, Nicole, my wife, she always loves to take a little travel pillow, right? So, cause she doesn't like sleeping on nothing in the tent, but I just use, my clothes in a packing cube. And I use that as my pillow to save a little bit of weight. So, everybody has their own hiking strategy, and I'm glad, we're sharing ours. But at the end of the day, you should always be comfortable with your own and just be happy with what you have, because, I think that makes it a very unique and individualized experience.
Yeah, and I love the idea of having like little luxuries in our family. We each have one
Yes.
luxury. When the kids were younger, we were bringing stuffies with us. Now that they're older, one of my little guys brings his Kindle or his Kobo with him so he can read books. Another one will bring a like a little notebook and some pens so he can do coloring, and the other will bring like a physical book he can read. As a family, I bring a little speaker so we can listen to audiobooks and podcasts, and it's just really nice for us. Like, especially going to bed, it's getting dark, and we have a little audio book that we're all just huddled in this, 5 people in a 4-person tent. It's way too, like we're all jammed together. It's really nice just to have those memories of listening to that. We even sometimes will set up the phone and watch a movie. So sometimes we'll download a movie, and if you get into camp early, like those are some of our best memories. And that's extra weight that we don't need to take. But for us, we just realize one reasonable luxury. Like sometimes it's a massive bar of chocolate and it's fun. It's like, let's eat this like half-kilogram bar of chocolate. Like it makes the trips fun. And you're right. The goal is not the lowest weight, or no, sorry, maybe the goal can be the lowest weight, or the goal can be whatever you want it. And we're all different humans. So whatever feels right is eventually going to be right.
Richard, how do you balance packing lightly though when it comes to taking kind of the emergency items? Are there anything that you kind of have as must-haves and no compromises on that?
So yeah, so once we started to do backpacking with the kids, I got really worried, and I took an 80-hour emergency medic first aid. So this is what like fully trained mountain guides have to take. And coming out of that, I almost had like a 40-liter emergency medical kit because they teach you everything that can go wrong. And after a few backpacks, I realized I need to cut this down.
Yeah.
And so I cut it down to it's probably maybe half the size of a shoebox. And for me, these are just the things I think, okay, I need these. So I got rid of some of like the emergency trauma that, like the Canadian Rockies is pretty remote. If I had to use that, we probably, wouldn't make an airlift, and focus on what's realistic. So like antihistamines and Benadryl is in there. Lots of like different tapes and blister stuff is in there. Some wound management's in there. But actually the biggest thing for safety for me is what I think is actually like food and hydration. And so like you talk about hiking your own hike. And for me, I carry a lot of water because with little kids, they kind of don't necessarily know if they're thirsty. And like an adult, we can maybe go an extra hour without water, but little kids can't. And so I'll sometimes have like 5 liters of water. So that's over 10 pounds of water in my pack. And I know, okay, this is overkill, but there have been so many times where we've demolished that because that's only 1 liter per person. And then I'm like, thank goodness I filled up all this water, even though we each have like a half liter, a liter of water, and a little, bottle, smart water on our packs. That's something I realized I just have to make sure we have enough water, like more than enough. And same with food. Like we have lots of little snacks. We make sure the kids are constantly eating every hour because little kids don't know like when they're hungry, or like they don't recognize as quickly as we do that, oh man, I have low blood sugar. And so I have a small first aid kit that I know how to use everything. But the bigger thing is like, let's make sure the kids have their wits about them and we all have our wits about them. So we don't get in, we lessen the likelihood of like stepping wrong or doing something like that.
Richard, this will be probably my last question on the topic of gear and packing. What do you think would be, a good tip for beginners in terms of getting into, or I guess getting budget-friendly gear, especially for those starting out? Because obviously you don't want to be breaking the back, buying $1,500, sleeping bags that are only 200 grams or anything like that. When you're first starting out, do you have any recommendations for those to try to make sure that everything stays on budget so they can enjoy at least after their trip and when they have to get back to their wallet?
Yeah, so I'm a big believer in buying quality gear, good name brand gear that's used. I think back, my niece did a trip with a friend of hers. It was their first backpacking trip up to, I think, Egypt Lake. And her friend bought Arc'teryx backpack, Arc'teryx rain pants, Arc'teryx coat. expensive sleeping bag, thousands of dollars of gear. They did one night. They woke up at 4 a.m. She says, "I hate this," and they walked out. And that person
Oh
never did
no.
another backpack. And it's like, oh man, you just blew thousands of dollars. And so, I sell a lot of my used gear. Like as we've done this, I've been, trading down, heavier gear for lighter gear. It's all good gear. And I just, put it up for use. I've been using Facebook Marketplace, and that's just a great way to find great gear. But you got to check it's in good condition. The one thing maybe I wouldn't buy used would be a bag, because it's hard to size if you're a beginner what the right backpack's going to be. And so that might be one place where I'd go to an actual gear shop. I wouldn't go to like just, a general goods or a general sporting goods shop. I'd go to a backpacking or a camping shop and get a 50 to 60 liter backpack if you're just starting. And ideally there's one on sale, but try it out, get some weight in it, and just make sure to find one that works for you.
Yeah, on the topic of backpack and sizing, I gotta say that is probably the one of the most overlooked aspects when it comes to putting on your backpack is making sure that it fits you properly. Because when I last was in Patagonia and did a trip there, we were hiking the O Trek, and I was hiking with a guy who has been on the trail with us for the past, I think 4 or 5 days. And he has been struggling at the back of the pack the entire time. And his backpack was his first time out there. And his backpack was, above his head. I could see it poking up from above his head. And the worst part of it was that when I looked at his backpack, I could see all the straps were just in the wrong way. They were all crinkling and whatever. And I said, hey, I can take a look at your backpack for just a second if you want. I can see you're kind of really hunched over and whatnot. It shouldn't really be that. It's an indicator that maybe the center of gravity of the backpack is off. And then after a few adjustments with the group's input, we got him back on the trail, and he said it completely changed the experience. Same amount of weight, same backpack, but just that lowering the hip straps, raising the load lifters, and having the right amount of engagement on the shoulders versus on the hips and everywhere else completely changed the game. So I agree. Getting a fitted to your backpack and getting the right backpack can change everything. That's really where it starts. But let's talk about safety and wilderness awareness. And I know that this topic might be a little bit more specific to the Canadian Rockies because that's where we've been talking about. But I think a lot of it can be generalized out to almost anywhere in the world. A lot of it is about wildlife and food management. So, Richard, I'm going to let you take the first question again. What do you think hikers should know about wilderness safety, particularly with bears and cougars? Because I think that's probably in everybody's mind when they're hiking in the Rockies.
Yeah. So for me, I'm really worried about animals that are predators and are hungry. And that's typically in spring, when bears wake up from hibernation, they're peckish. And then in autumn, when the older bears haven't eaten enough and they can get really aggressive. So the first thing is I'm just way more careful of what trips I choose to do early and late season. Early season, we almost always, or not always, but we often hear of cougar attacks in the Canadian Rockies. They tend to happen, earlier in the season. And bear attacks, the last big one was a bear in October for a couple that were out backpacking. And so kind of just a starting point, hungry animals are the worst. When it's, beautiful out and they're chomping down on all these berries, they kind of don't care as much about us. And I'm sure many of us have walked past bears and, they're eating at a bush and they don't really give a darn about us. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I also read the bear report here in the Canadian Rockies. Parks does a really good job of saying, here's where the bears are, here's where they've been sighted. And so if I'm going on a trip and I'm like, oh man, for the last 4 days, backpackers have reported like bears in the area. If they're grizzlies, I might stop into the ranger station and just talk and learn a bit more about what's going on. If they're brown or black bears, I'm not as concerned if it's kind of like middle of the season. But it's just like being prepared. Obviously carry bear spray. I used to carry bear bangers when those were legal in the parks. They're no longer legal. But yeah, it's part of life. If you make a lot of noise, if you keep your food away from where you're sleeping, if you don't take undue risks, you should be safe. One other thing is there's never been a bear attack. This is an anecdote I've read it somewhere in the parks. there's never been a bear
Mm-hmm.
attack on a group of 5 or more. So, if you're going out solo, boy, you're at a lot bigger risk than if you're going out as a group of friends. And so, going out backpacking with friends is great in general, but it also helps protect from animals.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. I'm fairly thankful myself that I don't have any firsthand experience to share any tips of what happens in a bear encounter. I've only really seen them from a distance, but I love your tip about checking the reports, because there are often reports for trails on bear activity, and especially when you're in the right season. So yeah, springtime or early summer, those are really great times to be bear conscious. And then obviously, maybe those are the best times to go with a group of people.
One thing that you made me think about is also, like, bear attacks are kind of random. Like, sometimes you just get it, you startle an aggressive bear or a mama with their cubs. I was talking with one former colleague, and she was up at a climbing camp. She rounded a corner, a minute out of camp where there were 50 people. She startled a bear. The bear was like, kind of right there, attacked her, and her bear spray was on the kind of the back side of her bag, or might have even been in the back of her bag. And she just said, I couldn't get it. And so what she shared with me is, like, have your bear spray super accessible. So often I'm hiking with my bear spray on my chest strap right there. If, sometimes you get these weird feelings, there's something around, or if I see a bear, or if I see cubs, kind of in the distance, I'll get my bear spray out. I'll leave the trigger guard on, but I'll have it out in my hand to be ready, because bear attacks, like, if you can see the bear, you're probably not going to get attacked. You can watch it from far away. Where the attacks happen is you startle something and it's right there in your face. And I've seen lots of people, like, they're taking out their camping gear at the day and they pull out their bear spray. It's kind of in the bottom of their bag. And yeah, bears don't attack and then just wait for you to open up your bag, unzip, get your food out, get your rain gear out, and then get your bear spray.
Yeah,
So
the bear chivalry is not a thing.
yeah. There's no chivalry. So that was really powerful to meet someone who's attacked by a bear who had bear spray, but they just didn't have it accessible.
So food is often a big concern when it comes to backpacking, and obviously awareness of bears. Do you have any tips for where to store your food at campsites? I know Parks Canada and here in the Rockies, there's lots of really great places for it, but maybe, can we share a little bit of your experience with it?
Yeah, we just follow the rules. There's either bear hangs or bear kind of, metal bins you can put your food in. We always bring a couple extra carabiners. Even though we're backpacking and we think there's bear bins, we'll bring like these waterproof dry bags that we use for canoeing, so that if we do have to hang it, we know the food's not going to get wet. When we're out hiking, we usually have a big empty Ziploc bag. So during the day, we put our food scraps or whatever, like wrapping into this one bag, because we don't want our backpacks to get impermeated with these smells. And so we try and just keep all the food smells out of our backpacks and off ourselves. Obviously, don't eat in your campsite. Don't take food to bed with you. Even something simple like we won't take like energy drinks to bed because we know that there's smells. And then, even things like toothpaste and lip balm, we put all those into the bear hang or the bear boxes. Just it's not worth having toothpaste or something simple in our tent. We just don't want a bear to show up. So we just follow what the rangers tell us to do. And so far it's worked really well. I've actually never seen a bear in camp, thankfully.
Yeah, absolutely. I think smell management is something that's kind of easy to overlook, because us as humans, you don't really think about, the toothpaste is an attractant, because, it's not something you really, that's really in your face, but to a bear or to any other animal out there, it could be something that could really, trigger their curiosity, and it's not something that you would want. How about in terms of safety? When we talk about the Rockies, the mountains always kind of have their own weather. And it's not always the case that you can look at a weather report and then, you get the hour by hour play, and that's exactly where you're going to see in the mountain. That normally never happens, because a lot of times the mountains can, drum up their own weather, and things can change, and those weather reports can be inaccurate depending on when they're taken and what time. Do you have any, tips for those who are trying to prepare for all sorts of different weather or sudden weather changes, especially here in the Rockies when you can have snow? I want to say at almost any time. It kind of feels that way sometimes, but when you also have risks of snow.
Yeah. So one thing I learned doing a lot of backcountry skiing is, like, look at the weather forecast. Don't look at, if you're going to go to the Rockies, don't just look at the Calgary forecast or the Banff forecast. There's lots of services that give you specialized forecasts for the valleys or the peaks you're going to go at. And so the first thing is like, just be prepared. Understand what kind of the different weather options are. So I'll usually look at Environment Canada, and then I'll look at, there's one called Mountain Forecast. There's spot.wx. I think that, I can't remember, something like that. It's something I've bookmarked on my computer. And I'll just say, like, what's it looking like in the places I'm going to go and the valleys around it, to try and get a feel of, do I want to do this trip? And if I'm seeing, there's huge lightning storms that are 100% certain, or snow is going to be everywhere, then often I'll say, hey, let's just go for a day hike this weekend and come back. Once I'm on the trail, you can get weird weather. It can be sunny in one valley, the next valley over it's snowing. And so a couple rules I have is, first off, I try and be off ridges and passes by kind of lunchtime. I don't want to be up high because you often get afternoon thunderstorms, and I don't want to be electrocuted. So that's kind of the first thing is, let's try and start early if we have to go over, I'll go on a big ridge. The second thing is, if it does get wet, be super, super aware of tree roots. I've fallen a couple times myself with little kids. I do not want them to fall and hurt themselves backpacking. Tree roots seem to be the slippiest thing out there. Sometimes some rock types can also be super slippery when it's wet. If it snows, that's where I get really worried, because a big snow dump, you can't see where the trail is. And, doing a lot of snowshoeing and backcountry skiing, occasionally you think, oh, hey, this might be the summer route I take. But like, if you're just out there, you can't see where the trail goes. Like, they have signs every kind of 4 or 5 kilometers. And so that's where it starts to get a little bit dangerous. And you have to kind of look and say, okay, if it's snowing, do I want to leave camp? Do I want to proceed? Do I know where I'm going? If you have a GPS route on your phone, that might be good enough. But it's easy, to put yourself into really dangerous positions with exposure, or if there's a lot of snow, maybe there's an avalanche risk, or if you're early in the season, there could be issues like that. And so I think with snow, my kind of rule is, if it looks like it's going to snow a lot, I just don't want to be out there, because that's where things can go really wrong. And then have the right gear. So as I mentioned before, for my kids, I make sure, we have warm weather gear we all have rain gear. If it looks like rain is in the forecast, but it's not going to be too hard and we go, we'll all take rain pants, because that makes life a lot easier. But it's also just being prepared. Again, something simple, having a map and knowing where you're supposed to go, having a GPS track on your phone, those two things really, really help. If you get, an inch or 2 of snow where maybe the trails, so you can still find it, but it's not as easy, those really help to try and figure out where the heck you're supposed to go.
Yeah, it's amazing how a little bit of snow or even a little bit of rain can radically change the whole experience. I recall when I was hiking in around Canmore, there was a lot of snow, and it's interesting when you're up high, especially when you're at the ridgeline or at a summit, the snow could actually almost create false ridges. And the blowing snow almost seems to pack its way, that it looks like that the actual solid rock is extending a few meters, a little further than it normally is. But what the reality is, that snow isn't at all supported. So I remember hiking around Canmore once and seeing a bunch of people on a false peak or a false edge of snow, and it just looked really scary, because they had no idea that what they were standing on wasn't actually the mountain, but it was actually just a pile of snow that had drifted in such a way that it looked like it extended a part of the ridge of the mountain. So yeah, definitely a lot of things to think about when you're out there. Do you have any recommendations, or maybe any tips to share on emergencies and what things can lead to emergencies? Because I know, snow can be really bad, especially those false peaks. And I think even just as simple as what you said there, a tree root, causing a slip, and then all of a sudden you're working with an ankle, and then you're 20 kilometers out, and that leads to a rescue. Do you have any other, let's just say, like, common mistakes that people would make that would lead to a rescue?
Yeah. So when I took my 80-hour first aid course, a lot of talk was like how to avoid needing to be rescued, and also like how rescues unfold. And so the first thing is, calling help is going to determine your survivability. If you're relying on someone to hike all the way down to the road, flag a person down, get all the way back to where you can get a cell phone and call somebody, that could be a full day until you get help. So having a GPS or a satellite SMS system is super, super valuable. Even with that, you got to be prepared that even if you're just out hiking, you may have to spend a night outside. So if you're backpacking, you have all the gear, it's not too hard. You set up your tent. But just be prepared that you might have to spend an extra night, have a little bit of extra food. I think the mistakes that are most often is people get too tired. They have a trip or a fall that causes, an injury that they can't continue. Often people get lost. And, you hear stories of a couple of hikers went out, they get off trail, they don't know where they're going, they end up getting cliffed out and they can't go up and they can't go down. I think that happened last year, the year before. And so being prepared, understanding the weather, understanding your route, having the right enough gear, having enough food, all those things reduce the chance of you'll need a rescue. And then the real reason you need a rescue is something accidental happens. You have a bad trip. Maybe you have, a bad reaction to a bug bite or, something along those lines where you're unable to proceed, in which case those are just kind of random. You can't, you can do everything you want, but randomness is just a part of life, of spending time in the outdoors.
Richard, for all the people that are getting into backpacking, I think there's always something that everybody should be aware of. It is this idea of leave no trace. Could you cover a little bit of what that means and how you could show that when you're on your own hike?
Yeah, it seems like the last 5 or 6 years, the backcountry's kind of changed, and you see more rubbish. You see people coming out to the backcountry to party and, leaving all their beer tins and whatnot. People having fires where they're not supposed to. And it's a bit worrying. The backcountry is fragile. It's something that if we all kind of work together, it will stay, available for all of us. There's nothing worse than coming out and finding like a campsite ruined. And so Leave No Trace is an organization that has some simple rules. My big ones that will Leave No Trace is, first out, whatever I pack out, I pack it back in. So, you sometimes you go to these bear bins and there'll be half full with rubbish. You've seen wrecked shoes and, what appear to be well-used underwear in there, as well as people just, leaving their food tins and whatnot. So yeah, just bring a big plastic Ziploc bag and just put the rubbish in there. It's really easy. Second is I don't disturb nature. So don't go, cutting down trees or, destroying stuff to, just for my own personal amusement. I don't do fires unless it's allowed, which is very, very few places now. Especially with all the fire issues we've had here in North America, with Hawaii, with California, all over the Canadian Rockies. We just have to be so fire smart because so many fires are actually accidentally set by humans. And then finally, I try and be a good backpacker to others. So like not playing music all night, not having, massive conversations in the tent that go through till 3 a.m. Not hogging, like if there's only one meal bench, not trying to hog it all for our family. Just like treat others how like I want them to treat us. And most campsites and most experiences, everyone's acting like that and being good. And then a few, you're like, oh man, I wish a ranger would come by here and start holding out, sending out tickets, because it's like chaos in some places, and it really ruins the experience. Like we've gone back from some backpacking early just because it's like, oh, this is just a bunch of people having a party and destroying nature, which for me personally, I find it really stressful.
Yeah, absolutely. Why don't we, let's try to end off on a bit more of a more positive note. I'd love to hear if you've got any kind of fun stories of backpacking. I'm sure everybody is 1,000, but maybe hear a couple from Richard.
Ironically, the two that come to mind both involve outhouses. So the first one is we were up at Elk Lakes, and which is a beautiful provincial park in British Columbia. And my son goes to the outhouse and he starts screaming, and I run over, and from afar, it looks like there's a bear cub in the outhouse. And I'm just thinking, oh my God, like this trip has gone like a whole lot different. I get a bit closer, I gotta grab him, and I realize it's a massive porcupine. And as I look a bit closer, it is kind of set up shop in that outhouse. It's eating all the walls. And yeah, that was just ironically now, because I know bears love to forage in outhouses. And so now when we go to camp, let me just go check the outhouse, guys. So that's the first one. The second one is there's a hike I mentioned called the Jasper Skyline. And whoever the ranger was on that trip either has a tremendous sense of humor or has a very different outlook on life, because the way the outhouses are is they're typically 2 to 4 potties in a row with no walls between them. And so you imagine all these strangers, you're sitting there, just sitting beside, be able to look the other person in the eye. And I have no idea what the heck they were thinking. But in every single case, kind of the unspoken rule is, before you go to the outhouse, you got to call out, is anyone in there? Because the last thing you want to do is, sit beside a stranger while they're doing their business. So I have no idea. I'd love to meet the person or somebody who knows more. Just like, what the heck were those rangers thinking in designing those outhouses specifically? Because they don't make any sense for how we behave as humans in general.
I think everybody in the community and the outdoors there is a little bit of an out of the box thinker. For us to be going through all this physical activity and managing all these risks and going outdoors to enjoy nature, you got to have a little sense of enthusiasm and maybe some eccentricity. So, Richard, where can our viewers connect to these communities that are into hiking and backpacking, especially here around the Rockies?
Yeah, so there's I guess I'll start with, I'm really involved with the Alpine Club of Canada. The Calgary and the Canmore sections do more kind of like hardcore mountaineering, but across Canada, the Alpine Club does have a lot of regional groups that kind of do more backpacking and hiking trips. And so it's a great organization with, real focus on leadership development and mentorship. There's also local hiking clubs, and these kind of vary. The Alpine Club's been around for 125 years. They've learned, how to train people and be safe in the mountains. Some hiking clubs are just some person, and you don't know how safety conscious they are. And I've met some hiking leaders that do tremendously dangerous things that frighten me, just as, oh my God, I can't believe you're doing that trip the way you're doing it. So you got to be careful in terms of joining another group. My kind of suggestion is, if you're just getting into this, just go on a guided trip or two. Guides, they spend approximately 7 years to learn how to be a mountain guide. They have so much knowledge. They, almost all of them love mentorship. I can only think of one guide that didn't like mentoring guests. And so if you're interested, you can kind of get a personal, 3 or 4 day expert just explaining all the nuances about safe travel, about packing, about all these things. And you end up getting all your reservations done. So that's what I do, is just try and find, either a group that seems to be quite safe, or just go out with a guide on a group trip and, let them show you around and teach you.
I love that. I'm going to be looking up some of these communities myself, because all this talk about hiking and camping is getting me is having me itchy to take out that backpack again. So, do you have any kind of last parting words for anybody looking to do their first time backpacking in the Rockies or their first trip? Any final piece of advice you want to give them?
One thing I've always felt is, if you get into the backcountry where your phone doesn't work and you can't check your email, if you do that for 4 or 5 days, it kind of changes your life. And the only downside is you'll want to do it again and again and again and again. I guess the benefit is it's good for your physical health. It's good for your mental health. These trips are cheap once you have the gear. You think of going off to an all-inclusive and you're going to spend thousands of dollars to sit on a beach. Here, it's like $20 a night for a backpacking permit when you can get it. So, it'll change how you travel, but it'll also bring you lots of joy, lots of health. So yeah, go and do your first trip. If you have any questions, reach out to our team at 10 Adventures. We love helping people choose first trips or discuss any questions, you can contact us on our Contact Us page on the site, and we'd be happy to help you with your first trip.
Yeah, and I could vouch for that myself personally. I've used the guides from 10 Adventures, not in Canada, and they have always been fantastic. So yeah, maybe I'll check that out myself too, because the Canadian Rockies are very intricate. And even after all my years of exploring, which is not that many, I'll admit, but I gotta say there's still so much to see. So Richard, really thanks a lot for having this podcast again. I'm glad we were able to talk a little bit more deeply into things that are kind of off the trail, like about the backpacks and safety. These are, I think, really important things to consider when you're planning a trip.
Mico, thanks for coming on again, and love having you on here, asking questions, sharing your expertise, and for everyone listening, thanks for listening to this episode of the 10 Adventures podcast. We'll be back next week to explore the world. Bye-bye. Start planning your own adventure by visiting us at 10adventures.com and listen to other episodes of the 10 Adventures podcast on Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else you find your podcasts.